Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Murder by Numbers. So, the hilarious thing that I always like to say in every one of these detective, mystery, whatever things is normally I'm not big on them, but I think that this story is unique enough to garner my interest, to make me go on like, yeah, sure, like this one will do. We have a story that kind of feels like that show, How to Get Away with Murder. I never really saw that show, but I've seen bits and pieces of it. And there's some flavors of this that, of course, feels like Dexter, of course, of which that I have seen, because it has to be like a story that's interesting enough. So, Murder by Numbers, the thing that kind of fascinates me is we got this like kind of perfect murder thing going on where these two guys are to try to attempt that. But we also have the detective who is the head of this case that has this very dark past that she's trying to run from until the very end of this movie, which we can kind of see how this plays out. So there's just a lot of things that are just kind of like, man, like there's so much going on in this movie, and hopefully once I get into spoilers I can get at least most of it all correct, because there's a lot of moving parts within this one, and there's a lot of chess piece moving in this movie, so any little small thing that I don't mention, it feels like there's going to be a huge massive domino of me just going, oh yeah, I forgot about this piece and that piece, because really there's just a lot of like small things within this film, which kind of enjoyed that. I like how we kind of have the back and forth of not only the detective side, but then also the villain side, and it kind of feels like we rarely get that. Most of the time, we get it from the detective side, and we have no clue who the actual murderer is. It's like a lot of those slasher whodunit things where they have to go on and be like, I wonder who the slasher could be. In this one, I don't know. I have to try to figure out everybody. I have to put the pieces together, and then like at the end, they just, well, bam, this is who the slasher is, and then you're like, oh, well, I guess I could have or should have thought about that one, but so within this movie, yeah, I would say really easily a good film, and it's also conveniently on HBO Max, coincidentally. Um, so yeah, like this movie, a lot of people probably remember this movie because I guess after this film, both Ryan Gosling and Sandra Bullock were together for a certain portion of time. And a lot of people were just going on and on about like, oh, well, Sandra's older and Ryan's younger, and who cares? Who really cares? Nobody did, but they just kept bringing it up. And plus, also, I don't know how many times, because like VH1, like I tell you, VH1 would go on and have these things where it's like, hey, the top 10 like celebrities that are younger and older robbing the cradle and this and that. I'm like, really? Because you know that that's only going to last for that one short brief point of time, and depending on how long that these relationships are going to really last. So it was so goofy how everybody had to go on and just like, oh yeah, like George Clooney and his girl at the time, age difference, really, it doesn't matter. But that's the thing, like people just need to have some time to kill, and so might as well go on and murder by numbers. That was a stupid joke. Anyways, so, but besides the fact, let's go on and let's go into the teeing up. Really is just we quickly find out that two men who are both Richard and Justin are to try to put together this perfect murder because they had read enough books, and we have these guys that seem to be educated talkers, and to the point to where Lisa is to go on and think that at some point Justin can go on and be some politician or to be some Napoleon Bonaparte, and Justin really doesn't see himself that way because he's not really liked. And I'm like, "Aw." But then again, at the end of this movie, like, I can't have really sympathy for Justin by the end of this film. But still, with the way things kind of play out, because he's still a murderer, he's still he's still a guy that did some stuff with some things, if you know what I mean. Wouldn't recommend it. Anyways, so and then Ryan Gosling went on to do Drive. So yeah, he learned so much from this movie to go on and do Drive. Yeah, like how to like almost take people down with a hammer. That's what he learned. So, because technically in Drive, we have it where Ryan Gosling is to take this hammer to this one guy and open his mouth, and is to want to put this bullet in this guy's mouth. Like, I don't know what it is with Ryan Gosling and hammers, but I just realized that. I'm like, oh yeah, like he was in Drive where he did the hammer pushing on. So, dark story had by Cassie here, running from her past, then tries to go on and is to realize that she can no longer run from her past, so she's going to face it in this movie. So, yeah, so if I didn't say all of that, saying it now. So, and I think it feels like both Ryan Gosling and Sandra Bullock are really kind of fighting for real estate in this movie, sadly. Everyone else is just kind of there, but them too. And that's sad. Because a lot of people had to, like, there's a lot of things going on with this movie, a lot of moving parts, but still, like these characters, like they're just so powerful that like everything else is just kind of like in the background for the most point. But anyways, so with that said, let's just go into that spoiler time. Let's just go into it. So yeah, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. I'm not going to do this perfectly, and I doubt I'll probably remember every single thing from this movie. There's a lot of just chess moving pieces, so yeah, I'm going to just try to do my best, but a lot of stuff will probably be forgotten because it's 2 hours of a film. There, I didn't like put notes and like to try to remember every single little beat and little everything. So this review will be what it is. So, what it looked like for a lot of people that are, if you guys ever saw The Last Dragon, what it looked like. Anyways, so, spoilers. Beginning of this movie starts off with Richard, who's Ryan Gosling, and Justin, who's Michael Pitt. We have these two who have this pact going on, not wolf pact, but pact nonetheless. And so they have this whole saying that they go on and say to one another, and they go on and have these guns to their head weirdly. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting way to put down a film. So both of them are to be like very well read characters, very intelligent guys. So, and they also have this weird, bizarre-ish photoshopped portrait of their faces melded together. And I'm like, okay, like, little bit, like, You would have thought that both these characters would have been in the same wavelength then, but like, I guess that's whole like the whole pact thing that like. But anyways, pushing on. So Richard is who's Ryan Gosling is going on to Justin, who is Michael Pitt. And so Richard is saying that, hey man, like, we're gonna finally do this or what? And Justin is just like, well, I got like a biology exam to study for. And Richard is like, well, that's you. Like, you're always like saying that you're busy, or you're always like, when are we ever gonna do this? And so Justin kind of gets in and he's like, okay, we'll do it. So all of a sudden the next day, we of course have Cassie with her partner Sam, who is kind of her newly uh, dubbed partner, like dubbed as if he was like sorted. I now dub you the most miserable partner that has ever partnered with somebody, because nobody likes Cassie evidently. Because yeah, come to find out, like Cassie's had some struggles with a lot of partners, and there's some people that think that Cassie is crazy, and I'm like, come on, like that's because like nobody else is to really want to get to know this girl, and it seems like Sam is, or it seems like Sam is trying. So give him the brownie points for that one. So Sam is to tell Cassie that I guess none of the guys would even let him into Cassie's crime scene. And Cassie's like, well, of course not, because I told them that. Like, to not have anybody on the crime scene until I get there. But all of a sudden, Cassie's seeing some, like, police officer who's just kind of walking around in the scene. And so Cassie's like, hey, get out of there. So Cassie and Sam are kind of strolling through this spot with these big, massive boots on. And so Cassie's telling Sam, it's like, follow my exact footprints as best as you can. So they start walking down this section, and they, of course, see Olivia, who is to be this woman, this victim. And we have her in this kind of like plastic bag. I'm like, what do they like steal like a mattress bag from this? I say mattress bag because mattresses tend to have these big plastic bags that usually look like that kind of fabric. If you ever go and buy a mattress, a lot of times it would have those bags left over, or like I think in one store that I had, like they had like extra bags that you can kind of just rip out of certain things, because eventually the place sadly was going out of business. So it was, I guess, really good that they had those things anyways, because yeah. But by that time we had extra bag things, but it doesn't really matter. But it's to the point of this story. So Cassie is inspecting the body, finding out that there's a finger chopped off, I guess, as some kind of present or memento present. That didn't sound right. As a memento, as a keepsake, weirdly, because goofy, weird guy. So, and then there is a number of carpet and hair follicles, and so I guess one of the hair follicles, I guess, was from Richard, and so that leads them to question Richard. But there's a whole reason that we'll get to here in a second. So Cassie is to also find here that there is vomit that is on the ground, and so Sam goes on is to take the specimen of vomit and put it in some bag for them to go on and test it. So kind of takes a long time for, I guess, them to like to test this stuff. Kind of weird. You would have thought they would have like ran tests and all this stuff, but maybe they were exactly looking for the right thing. Maybe they had to try to figure out whose DNA this was to test it against this thing, because Cassie later on is to go through Justin's garbage and to try to pull something out from Justin's trash and then try to match the DNA. So maybe that's why it took forever. So, because I guess if technically both Richard or Justin aren't in the system, then because they haven't done a crime, then that's when, of course, it's hard for somebody to match anything. That's when. Suppose I watched one episode of Monk because it's a unique enough story, and they go on and they mention that there's a lot of times, surprisingly, when cases go cold, just because they don't have a already DNA through like the system that they can match it to. And so if they can't go on and find somebody where this DNA matches, then like a case could go cold, sadly enough. So, but they also find that there's certain yellow carpet that seems to be this like very generic carpet, that there's a mass number of carpets that are to have this kind of thing. So they also find that there's an odd hair that is to be a baboon hair, and they're like, okay, this makes no sense. So, but we also have a hair that matches Richard. So we go on and have Sam going with Cassie to her place, and Sam realizes that Cassie is to have this boathouse, like this boat that is to be made as a house, and hence why boathouse. Not roadhouse, but boathouse. Anyways, so Sam at one point is going and meeting with Cassie in her house, talking about things, and that leads Cassie to get very close to Sam, and to the point where it seems that Cassie's really interested in being with Sam, and Cassie is telling Sam, it's like, hey, I won't get too possessive, and like we can just have fun. And so that leads to them both going at it within Cassie's bed, and then in the middle of the night, Cassie just freaking kicks Sam out of the bed, and she's like, you know what, this bed is too small. And Sam is like, well, no, it's not. And Cassie's just like, well, get out of here. Because Cassie is also, I think the reason why this is technically triggered is that she just kind of needed, like, some kind of comfort of some sorts. And so Cassie is to go on and hear that there is a guy trying to call her who is Carl Hudson. And so that is kind of bringing back a whole bunch of nightmares. The point of not only Cassie looking at her new case and all these photos taken, then she's also going back and looking at the Carl case, and everything is kind of flashing before her eyes. And I guess Cassie at one point was dumped off into this place just like Olivia was. So, and I guess Cassie had gotten stabbed like 17 some odd times, and Cassie's had this scar that when she was trying to get with Sam, Cassie was just saying like, "Hey, can we just kind of leave my shirt the way it is?" And Sam is just like, "Well, okay." As he was kind of consistently forcing her to kind of slow things down. So let's go on to the whole other part of things. So Cassie goes and is to have to question Richard about his boots because they have very specific. I think it's Vigo or Vito boots. It has this weird, goofy name that these boots are to be, of course, very expensive, and so Cassie and Sam go uh, to meet with Richard to question him about these boots. So we also have a moment before this happens where Justin is going up to class and he's doing this poem talking about power and and all of this jazz. And so the teacher, of course, is asking anybody to kind of debate what Justin has to say. And so Richard, who, of course, is, I guess, consistently sleeping in this class. Like, I remember one guy in my class who I guess would consistently take this medication, and this medication would always make him drowsy to the point of our teacher like forcing this kid to go on and have to like stand up during during the back of class throughout the whole entire day of class so he wouldn't fall asleep. Uh, but really, like, there are some classes, especially once you get like the later and later you go on in certain classes, there's really just certain classes that are just so like, no offense to the teacher, but there's just certain classes that are just boring. It's just like, I don't want to learn about this whatsoever. Or there's a lot of times where there's obviously certain movie days, and I'm just like, dude, I've already seen this movie like 30 times already. Because pretty much, like, any of the movies that were to have actually had me see them in school, like, I had already seen easily. And so I was like, oh yeah, this happens. Like, and I would just hand the teacher the paper, and then I would just doze off for the rest of the class, or just go on and do like other things for classes, just because like I'm like, I've seen this movie already. Plus, it also helped the fact that like I had an older sibling, and so a lot of school stuff of like, oh yeah, we watched this thing. I'm like, oh yeah, I've never seen that. And so I would go on and I would watch whatever, because immediately I knew ahead of time, like, oh, okay, I could just prepare myself for what eventually is coming somewhere down later on the line in the line. So that would always be just really easy to eventually just be like, oh, well, I'm a movie person anyways. And so, like, class would always be easy when they would try to just be like, well, let's just have them watch a movie today, and, like, just give them a thing of paper that they're going to have to go and write all this down on. Like, done, here you go. So, pushing on. So, we had it where Richard is to go on and talk to Justin and is saying, like, how does Justin know anything about power when he doesn't have any? And because Justin, of course, is just the usual guy who ends up getting picked on, and really nothing is ever probably going to work out with this guy, even though he's smart enough. So Justin goes back to his seat, and Lisa is consistently talking to Justin and consistently calling him Bonaparte and telling him he needs to get laid. So And it's not like Lisa is going to be doing any laying anytime soon with Justin, it seems like in this movie. But it seems like we find out the opposite because it seems that both Richard and Lisa have had a history. So, anyways, uh, at one point we have both Justin and Lisa, they're doing a test together, and Justin was very distracted, and so Lisa goes on and just gives Justin like this like 19 out of 20 score, and Justin's like, "Hey, why did you do that?" And Lisa's like, "Well, because like I need you to help me with my grades because like I knew that you would just easily blow through this whole thing, so because you're like smart, so I just need your help." So, and we're getting to the Richard boot thing, but I just wanted to get to this first. So Justin goes on with Lisa, and the whole entire time we have Richard, who's kind of this jealous lover with Justin, weirdly. Um, because when Justin, it seems like everything's working out for him, and for Richard, it's like he's still just kind of like stuck in this bubble of things where it's like uh, people put up with him, but like they'll probably just put up with him because of his wallet, sadly. So, anyways, let's get to the boot thing. So, Cassie and Sam are to go and question Richard because he has a hair fragment and he has these boots possibly because he had made a credit card charge for these. And so Richard goes on, he's like, seriously? Like, you guys are after me for my boots? And they're like, well, yeah. And Richard is to mention to these guys, is like, well, like, I reported these boots missing, like, 3 months ago. I made a big stink about it, and, like, somebody had stole my boots. So, you're telling me whoever was to steal these boots could quite possibly commit some murder. So Richard is going on and saying like, well, hey guys, like I want to cooperate in any way that I can to go and help you guys out. So so both Cassie and Sam fact check what Richard was to say and come to find out that he was right. And so Richard and Justin are going on and having this whole videotape that Richard was to record about this dialogue with these detectives, and Richard is telling Justin like, "Well, hey, like, come with me tonight, and we'll talk all about it, and we can kind of gush about what's going on." And Justin's like, "Well, I'm sorry, I have something else going on right now." And Richard is like, "Well, what is it?" And he's like, "Well, I just have something else going on." Richard goes to find out that Justin is continuing to hang out with Lisa. And so now we just have Richard, who's this jealous man of sorts. And so Richard is like, you know what? I just want Lisa to sadly enough go away. So Richard goes on and he, of course, is to talk to Lisa one day and is to try to get her into his car, and we get this build where it's like we're thinking that Lisa is tempted and Richard is trying to be fun. He's like, yeah, like, don't you love this music? Yeah, yeah, come on with me into this car. I'm not as suave as Richard, I'll admit that, but like it seems that Lisa is interested. So for which it seems we don't know how exactly all of that played out. It would have been nice if we would have actually seen the real legitimate, like, did she sleep with him? Did she not sleep with him? Because Richard is to say that both him and Lisa were to have slept together before, So we can naturally assume from the previous time of taping, Richard could have already had that tape of that girl and gave it to Justin, because what happens here is Richard is to give Justin his tape saying that Lisa was to cheat on Justin with Richard, and Justin watches the tape as proof, and Richard is like, well, hey, are you upset with me? Are you mad with me? And I would have just said, like, well, technically, yeah, because when really looking at it, Richard was to have gone into the act with this woman. Why did he push that hard? Really, we could have had it where Richard should have or could have just gone on and just told Justin, it's like, well, hey, yeah, like, it seems like she was interested in me, but I guess that would have been the full legitimate proof of it all. So Justin goes on and meets up with Lisa and calls her a hoe and is to give her this tape, fling it at her. And so now we have a guy named Ray. So we find out that Richard is to have taken all those samples from a guy named Ray, who is to have this this orangutan or this monkey of sorts, and is to have these carpet samples because they're going to plant this whole murder on a guy named Ray, who is actually Chris Penn in this movie. So, because Ray, of course, is this guy who is to deal marijuana to Richard, and we really have this guy Ray, who, while he's kind of dealing with Richard, he's watching this movie, let's just say, and I'm just like, man, what a creep. Not of course to Chris Penn. I'm just saying, like, the character, real, what a guy. Then again, I'm not no angel of whatever of virtue and all that jazz. So, like, hey, like, it is what it is. But again, so pushing on. So now we have it where both Sam and Cassie, like, Cassie's like, I don't know, like, there's something about these two guys. There's something about them. Because we have Cassie that goes on to this restaurant that has this certain order of food that they find out what that vomit technically was. And so Cassie goes on and is to ask this guy who works at this restaurant, well, hey, who was to have ordered this kind of meal during this day? And the guy that works there is like, well, if anything, it wasn't Richard, it was a guy named Justin. And, like, he starts talking about him, describing him, and, like, this guy really knew, like, exactly when Justin was to be here and when he was to leave. And, like, why would that guy be so precise, as if he's, like, stalking that guy? But Cassie's to figure out, like, yeah, it must have been Justin who is kind of involved in this case somehow. And so Cassie goes on and questions Justin, and is to mention about him going to this restaurant, which, of course, Cassie mispronounces it, and Justin corrects him. So, or corrects Cassie, I mean. So, that has merely Cassie just going on like, there's something about this guy. I just can't put my finger on it, but there's something about both Richard and Justin that is just, I just can't let go. So, even to the point where Cassie goes on and is to follow both Richard and Justin and find out that they're technically arm in arm with one another, And Justin, of course, is to be like, hey man, we shouldn't be hanging out with one another. Uh, if anything, like we're not in the clear yet. There might be some suspicion. And then, of course, Cassie, who is cameraing away. Cameraing? That is probably not a word. She's shooting away at this with this camera. There we go. And she, of course, is having pictures of them both together, which, of course, leads Richard to see Cassie taking these photos, and he starts to get really aggressive with her because if not before, he was kind of making fun of her outfit that I guess she went on and bought pleather at Kmart and whatever. It's like, who cares? Like, it's just like, since Richard is like a rich guy, he has to kind of break everybody down, and is to just be like, well, hey, like, I'm sure you got the cheap stuff, right? Doesn't matter. Like, as long as it looks good, but like that's the whole like thing of things where everybody has to have like these certain brands and certain whatever, where it's just like, you know what, life is too short. Let's just kind of go on and just, why are clothes so important? But it is what it is. So Cassie and Sam. So we now have where both Richard and Justin are to now be put into this interrogation room to be questioned about this possible murder. And both of them are kind of back and forthing, and because there isn't a murderer right now out there. So both Richard and Justin are getting questioned about this, and so it seems that they're both Cassie and Sam are to figure out who was the culprit, who was to have actually killed this girl, because it seems that the clock on Olivia's house was to say that it was 9:27, and Richard was to break it at the perfect time, and to say that it was 9:27 because what happened was Richard was to dump this girl into his vehicle, into his trunk, with her still technically being alive. And then Richard, who is with this study group, was to say, hey, I'm going to leave so that way I can go on and get some, go to this ATM to afford this pizza for the study group. So Richard goes off supposedly for 5 minutes but takes 15, and is to actually dump off this body to give as a handoff to Justin, and then Justin and Richard are to kill off this woman, which then has Justin go on and dump the body, and he of course vomits because he is to go on and have to chop off this finger and do all these gruesome things, because Justin is the one kind of doing technically most of the heavy lifting here, where Richard just had to go on and knock this girl unconscious and then put her in his trunk, and then everything else is to be taken care of by Justin, because Richard is to go on and go back to his study group and hope that everything turns out okay. So we have it, of course, where both Cassie and Sam are figuring all this out, but there isn't any real proof to nail these guys. And so once we have it where Richard is just kind of like, you know what, like maybe I should go on and just kind of say something, or other. All of a sudden we have Richard's lawyer who is to come into the room, and he's like, hey, like if you're not gonna book them, like don't go on and and question them anymore. So Cassie is just frustrated at this point. She's like, oh my God, we could have had them. We could have had them at this point. So we have Sam that is to, of course, figure out about the whole Carl case. And so at one point, Sam is to confront Cassie about it. And because there's something about Cassie where she goes on, and Cassie's to mention to Justin how in 5 years Richard will be nobody. And it seems that Sam is to start to pick up on like what Cassie's kind of saying, how like Cassie's just kind of like, yeah, like Richard is going to be a nobody in 5 years. Like he's going to go on and be this like pole vaulter and this and that, and he'll be a nobody. And Sam's like, when was Richard ever a pole vaulter? And Cassie's like, well, like I was just kind of. And Sam was like, you have a story to tell me, and you better tell me it now. So Cassie starts explaining about this man that she was with called Carl, and really all that mattered to her was this guy's body and how great it was. And so Cassie is to go on with this guy, even so much that he marries her, and Cassie changes her name to Cassie Hudson. So it seems that both Cassie and Carl were having this really rough patch, to the point of Carl now saying it's like, well, hey, if you leave, like, I'll kill you. And Sam was telling Cassie, it's like, well, why didn't you just go on and leave when like this guy had fell asleep, or when like he was at work? And Cassie was like, no, like I had to be there when he was there. Like I had to confront him. And so Sam was like, well, why aren't you confronting him now? Because Cassie is to go on and be the person who is to possibly uh, be the kind of the nail in the coffin for Carl. And it seems that Cassie doesn't want anything to do with what's really going on here. So Sam is just like, well, like, shouldn't you go on and face this? Like, you're running from your past. Like, you need to go on and face this. So by the end of the movie, of course, we see Cassie, who is at this this hearing of sorts, and she's going to face this and be present and say that she's there to face this case. So Sam is hearing from a number of people, like her captain, or Al Swanson, who I guess is a DA, that Cassie is like crazy. Like she would go on and consistently having affairs with her partners, and Sam would eventually confirm this with Cassie, to have Cassie say, yeah, like me and Al used to be together, but at one point, like things just kind of turned sour, and then that ended the relationship, so on and so forth. So now let's go into other parts of this story. So now we have to pin this murder of Olivia on Ray. So now we have Richard making his way to Ray's place, because Richard, of course, to know exactly where Ray is at this trailer. And if Justin was to do the heavy lifting in the beginning part of this movie, now Richard is to come in and is to find Ray and is to shoot him in the head. And while this guy is sleeping, Richard is to wake him up. And Ray's saying like, "Hey, did you bring all those cheerleaders to meet with me?" And Richard's like, "No, I'm gonna give you something to sleep," which is a bullet to the head. So Ray is now dead. Richard goes on and plants all of this stuff, and plants these boots, plants the finger, plants everything. So now we have it where both Cassie and Sam are making it to Ray's place, and like, yeah, like slam dunk, like we got all the evidence here, everything's perfectly in place. And so Ray was the one that did it, because we found out that Ray was to go on and be dealing drugs to all the kids, so it makes perfect sense for this janitor to steal these boots and to go on and do this crime. It makes perfect sense. So Cassie is just like, well, like, yeah, that might seem all open and shut, but no, like, that's not who really did it. So much so where Cassie is doing this DNA thing being put through, and her captain is telling Cassie, it's like, this case is already closed. You're wasting money on something that like is a waste. Like, I'm not going to go on and put forth any money towards this case that is already closed. So Cassie turns around on her superior and is to do the DNA test anyways with her own money. And so the captain is to go on and just be so frustrated with Cassie to the point of like, hey, should we go on and have you see this doctor again? Like, I'm just done with you. So Cassie's really at her last straw here. So we have Richard and we have Justin, who are continuing to spend time with one another, and it seems like things are starting to crack between the two of them. We have at one point where Cassie is talking to Sam and just desperately pleading for Sam to figure out that there's a new angle here, and to go to the captain and tell him to try to keep this case open. And Sam goes on to both Richard and Justin's classes and starts like looking over them with a hawk. And it seems that Richard and Justin are kind of looking at one another. And so at one point we have Sam who talks to Lisa. And so it seems that both Richard and Sam are kind of getting scared about things. They're starting to question things. So, and I'm trying to think if there's anything that I have left really to go on and say about this movie, because I want to try to make sure I got everything perfectly in line and talked about here, because I'm immediately thinking like, there's a million things going on in this movie, and I'm almost at like an hour. Like, I would immediately think there's probably 30 different things that I probably didn't mention somewhere down the road, but that is what it is. So, and I feel like I'm towards the end of this movie, which doesn't quite make sense to me. So, we have a moment where Justin is talking to Lisa, and Lisa is to realize that, like, Justin, you're not a murderer. As Justin is to confess to her, it's like, hey, like, we were involved in this murder, we murdered a woman. And Richard is going on and calling Justin, asking him if he's with Lisa. Justin says no, and Richard's like, I know you're with her. Like, I know. So it seems like both the guys are starting to have mistrust. And so I think the real problem here is that both these people are just starting to lie to one another. If they had absolute truth about this whole entire thing, and maybe Justin was to go on and tell Richard, like, hey, like the killing was fun and all, but now I'm going to go on and just kind of do something else. Like, you would have thought that, like, Richard would have just been like, well, okay, well, like, I guess I'll just have to go on and just kind of like live my own life, because Richard just kept on hanging with Justin, and it seemed too suspicious. So to the point when like Richard and Justin like had gone on and started to get interrogated, like Justin was saying that he had tutored Richard at one point, but Justin had to mention that anyways because they would have figured it out. So Richard is assigned to take some items that are in his house and is to run off to make it to this seemingly cabin that uh, Richard and Justin continue to hang out at. And so Richard is telling Justin that he is leaving, that he's done, that he never wants to go back to his home anymore, and that he's just going to go on and run off. So Justin is to make his way back to see Richard, and so Richard and Justin are having this moment together that eventually Cassie is going to meet them there, where Richard and Justin are going to have their pact where they say their thing, and they're going to have, of course, guns to their head again. And so they say their pact, and Justin, of course, is to fire his gun, or Richard, of course, is to fire his gun, and Justin is to fire his gun in the air. Justin is to tell Richard, like, I bet my gun is loaded and yours isn't. So show me the chambers of your gun. Richard showcases that the gun is completely empty, and Richard's like, sorry. It's like, so Justin's like, well, hey, how about we go on and we do this? How about I shoot you and then I shoot myself? And Justin's like, no, don't, or I'm getting names confused now. Richard is like, no, don't go on and do that. Don't do that. So Cassie is making her way to this place because she has to figure out where, of course, they are to have their hideout. And now Cassie is to confront Justin, who he's kind of back and forthing about whether he's going to shoot Richard or shoot himself. Cassie's to desperately try and have Justin drop this gun. So Justin does drop the gun. Richard picks it up, runs off, tries to have some shootout moments with Cassie, but then it seems like he is to pretend to shoot himself and fall into this hole. Cassie is to follow to think that maybe Richard did shoot himself, and Cassie's to see this little fabric piece, and all of a sudden Richard is to come from behind her with this item. So it ends up with both Cassie and Richard wrestling here, and we had a moment before where Richard was pushing Richard was pushing Cassie and consistently trying to kiss her in this car before, and was consistently trying to grab for this camera, trying to go on and push this girl, and she smacks him with this door, and Richard's like, oh, I bet that happens with all the guys that you've ever been with. So that way Richard can file a report against Cassie saying that he got slugged by her. So they can go and have like a restrainment order or something being put on Cassie. So she can leave him alone. So Cassie is wrestling with Richard here off on this this deck. And it's a very small deck, but it is what it is with this film. So The smallest of decks. I'm telling you. Anyways, uh, what is he talking about? It's a deck joke. Anyways, so the wrestling, and we have like Richard, who's immediately thinking he's winning. He's going to win here. He's freaking licking Cassie and all this kind of weird, goofy stuff. So what happens instead is Cassie is to get her power, get her strength, and is to toss Richard over the side, and he, of course, is to fall to his death. Cassie's realizing that all of a sudden this deck is buckling, and she is to almost fall to her death herself, and Justin is to come out and save her. Justin was to also take a bullet for Cassie, and then he went down. And so Justin is to go on and have this little, uh, this little, I'm assuming it's like it looks possibly like a thing of, like a little piece on a thing of stairs that you go on and give to Cassie for Cassie to be able to kind of make her way back up. And so after this, we have all the other cops coming in, and so Cassie all of a sudden is to look at her neck where Richard was to strangle her, and Cassie's like, you know what? I don't think it was Richard who was the one who killed Olivia. I think it was Justin. And so Sam is coming in here and he is whispering sweet nothings to his partner, saying like, hey, like, you know when I would say that I wanted to get a different partner? Not anymore. And Cassie's like, yeah, that's what I thought. Because Cassie knew what no one else did. So Cassie, when she's hearing about these whisperings, Cassie's to mutter about a videotape. And then Cassie goes over to Justin, and Cassie mentions, like, well, I guess it seems that Richard wanted a memento of this murder, and it seems kind of like a stupid thing to go on and do because there's evidence right there. But Cassie is mentioning that I guess Richard here had taped the whole murder, and Justin was the one who have actually killed Olivia. Because Cassie's also mentioned that there is marks upon her neck that aren't Richard's, and Justin's like, well, Richard could have taken the ring off at any time, and Cassie's like, but did he though? So immediately, like, Cassie's like, yeah, you did it. And so Cassie at one point is to have said to Justin that she thinks that she can go on and like do the right thing with Justin, but once Cassie realizes that Justin was actually the murderer of it all, it's like, yeah, not much I can do. So Justin goes to prison, and so after that we have Cassie who's to deal with her past and confront it and do it, and that's how the movie just kind of finishes up, with Cassie just kind of believing so strongly that she was to do the right thing. And so yeah, that is technically I think covers most of this movie. So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure there's a billion things that I forgot about. Try to put this piece all together, and plus also it's again one of those very like late days where I'm just was trying to figure out what movie to review next, and this just so happened to be one of those. So hopefully I got technically most of the pieces right. There was the one moment where Justin was going on a meeting with Lisa at her place, and she was to have these portraits of herself. And we come to find out that this girl evidently likes to paint herself, but paint herself without having clothes on, which I'm wondering if she does that to all of the guys that she's with to try to get them into the mood. But it seems that Justin is consistently saying to Richard that all they would do was kiss and that would be it. And Richard's like, sure, sure, right. Because Justin's technically weirdly a gentleman and he won't tell Richard that uh, they aren't going to do any more than that. So, with that said, hopefully all the rest is kind of covered. But I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.